In this video, I will show you how to create your own chord progressions from scratch, even if you don't know any music theory. In my previous video, we created a drum loop, and now we're going to create chords on top of that. Eventually, I'm going to build a whole track out of it. Let's first listen what we're going to make in this episode. I've decided that I want to use either piano or electric piano for my chords. So first I'll try to find sound that works well on top of these drums. I will create Kontakt instance and try some electric pianos first. I typically use sounds from Kontakt Complete or Kontakt Factory library. If you don't have any of those, don't worry, your DAW most likely have some stock instruments that are more than enough to get you going. I like the sound of this gentleman piano, so I'm gonna stick with that for now. I'm gonna create a folder for keys. I think that the easiest way for beginner to start creating chords is to focus only on the bass note first. Don't worry about the harmonies at this point. Also, you should start with the C major scale, which is the easiest scale there is. Later on we can transpose it to any other key we like. If you don't know what scale or key is, don't worry, all you need to know is that in C major scale you use only white keys of your keyboard. We're gonna start our chord progression from the root chord, which is C major in our case. Lofi uses a lot of jazz chord progressions, and I know that often those doesn't start from the root chord. But to make things easier to understand, I'm gonna start from C. My first goal here is to create just 4 one-bar long bass notes that fits together. If you're following along this tutorial, you should try to make something different at this point. Make it your own, just trust your ears. Okay, that sounds nice. As you can see, I used this F twice in a row, but with harmonies I'm gonna make this second F a little bit different from the first one. And now we can start adding some more harmonies to our chords. So we are going to turn these bass notes to triads. Triad is a chord that has 3 voices. It has root, which is our bass note, and it also has third and fifth. So if the first note is C, then third note is E, and fifth note is G. And remember that since we are in C major scale, we are counting only white keys. Now let's complete rest of the chords as well. So next we have G, and third for that is B, and fifth is D. Then we have F, third is A, and fifth is C. Then we have another F. I'm gonna make it the same as this first one, but I will make variation for this later on. To make these chords sound more jazzy and give them a little bit more color, we need to add even more voices to them. Typically adding 7th or 9th voice gives that jazzy vibe. You could even try adding 11th or 13th, but I'm sticking with only 7th and 9th for the sake of simplicity. So if our chord is C major, 7th for that is B, and 9th will be D. I'm gonna try to add either 7th or 9th to all of these chords, and in some cases maybe both. Let's just listen what sounds good. Okay, right now the chords are sounding good on their own, but when listening them in sequence, it sounds kind of awkward. We need to do some chord inversions to make them flow better. Basic rule when moving from one chord to another is to do it with as little movement as possible. So you want to avoid big jumps between chords. Before doing inversions, I'm gonna duplicate my bass notes and move them one octave lower. Now we can always hear our chord's root note clearly. Now I start comparing two chords that are next to each other. If there are big jumps, I will shift notes in octaves to make jumps smaller. Bear in mind that this is still the same chord if you shift these notes in octaves. It just has been inverted. And while shifting these notes, I'm also thinking about chords playability. If I spread these notes too far apart, chord becomes harder to play with one hand and therefore a little bit unrealistic. So I'm just using my ears here and try to make this chord transition sound smooth. Okay, that works for me. I will do the same for the rest of the chords. Okay, now our chords are sounding good together, but no human could play the chords like this. Each note has exactly same velocity and they are exactly on grid. This is okay for pads, but if I want to use any kind of piano in my track, I need to humanize these chords a little bit. I will duplicate this MIDI, so I have original saved if I want to use it for pads later on. First, I will take my snap to grid off and zoom in a little bit. Now I will just randomly shift the starting positions of these notes. And while we're here, I will change the velocities randomly. I will do the same thing for the rest of the chords. With these little changes, it already sounds a lot better and more like a real human played it. Another way to make chord progression more interesting is to arpeggiate it. I will once again copy this MIDI so I have all the variations saved. I'm still keeping my snap to grid off. I'm using this grid only as a guideline. Now I will randomly move starting positions of these notes to grid. Sometimes I might leave two notes at the same position. Just listen what sounds good. That sounds nice. Once again, I will do the same thing for the rest of the chords. There we go, now it sounds quite good. Next I'm gonna do a little bit of processing for this sound. Later on I will probably layer more instruments with these same chords, but for now I will use only this piano sound. First I'm gonna apply EQ, and I will cut some lows to make sure there's nothing that would interfere with kick and bass. Sometimes pianos might get a little bit boomy and resonant around 100 Hz to 300 Hz, so I often find myself cutting a little bit from there. Since we don't have any other melodic instruments here, I'm not gonna do anything else for the EQ at this point. I'll probably do some more EQing later on once we add more instruments. Next, I'll add compressor to make the volume more even. When compressing individual instruments, I typically go with 4:1 ratio. I will disable makeup gain and adjust attack and release to my taste. Then I'll change the threshold until I get around 3 to 4 dB gain reduction. For a beginner it might be a little bit hard to hear compression, especially when doing very subtle gain reduction. But trust me, using compressors will make your track sound more even. Typically next I would add RC20 to make this sound more lo-fi, but since it can be quite expensive plugin, I'm gonna use Cymatics Origin instead, since it's completely free. With Origin I like to just browse these presets and try to find one that I like. I like this lo-fi preset, but I turned down the crackle a little bit and added a little bit of saturation. Okay, that works for me. One more thing that I do here is sidechaining. I explained sidechaining in more detail in my previous drum tutorial. I'm gonna use Cubase's stock compressor. Activate sidechain from this button and select Kick as trigger from this list. I'm using 4:1 ratio, fast attack, fast release, disable makeup gain, and then just adjust threshold to my taste. To make it a little bit easier to hear, I'm gonna solo kick and piano. Okay, that's it. Our chord progression is ready and I like it. Finally, I'm gonna show you a couple of other ways to create chord progressions. One tool that I use very often is Scaler. This plugin costs about 60 to 70 euros on full price, but it's also quite often on sale. If you're struggling with chord progressions, this is definitely worth the price. In here, you can just select your style and then start browsing different chord progressions. If I'm making lo-fi, I will probably see what's under jazz or maybe neo soul. And if you press this button, you can bind these chords to your MIDI keyboard keys. Now it's really easy to just play around with these chords. Once I'm happy with the progression, I can record or draw MIDI notes. Then I can press MIDI capture inside Scaler and play through the progression. Now I can just drag and drop the MIDI to my sequencer. There's a lot more in-depth features in Scaler, so let me know in the comments if you would like me to go through it in more detail. Okay, another way to get chord progressions is using MIDI packs. You can buy some, or you might even find some free MIDI packs with Google. I have bought this Cymatics Lofi MIDI expansion. In my preview window, I can select preview instrument for these chord progressions. Once I find one that I like, I can just drag and drop it to the sequencer. And of course, I can modify it here to my taste. Another good way to find chord progressions is to just use Google. For example, you can type jazz chord progressions and see what comes up. Although sometimes you might need to know how to read sheet music. It's worth to do a little bit of research with Google on what kind of chord progressions there typically are in lo-fi or in jazz. Okay, that concludes this episode. I think we're going to look into bassline in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if this kind of content is helpful for you. I'll see you in the next episode.